Hey everyone, this is Carter. Welcome to this episode of Making It Up, the conversation series where I talk to other writers and we just kind of shoot the shit for a while. And I get to hear about their origin story and how they became who they became. And today's guest was really interesting because he's a friend of mine who I've known for a while through the writing community. And when I met him, we were debut authors at the International Thriller Writers annual convention, Thriller Fest, back in 2012, I think it was, or 2011. And he was writing under the name Anthony Franze, which is his name, and he was writing legal thrillers because he was and still is. He works for a law firm that does a lot of work with the Supreme Court. So he has really the inside knowledge and of all the inner workings of the U.S. Supreme Court. So he wrote a few thrillers within that realm, and then, kind of felt that he had exhausted what he wanted to say within kind of that brand. And he started writing, different types of thrillers. And in order to kind of extract himself from that previous audience and repackage himself with this new kind of writing, he wrote under a pen name. So he writes under Alex Finlay, and has done really well under that name for sure. And his latest book, his latest book is called Every Last Fear, under Alex Finlay, and his upcoming novel in March of 2022 is called The Night Shift. So it was interesting to hear his journey, as a lawyer into the world of fiction writing, and then the journey from writing one type of novel to another and changing the name in the process. And the weird things associated with people calling you by a name that's not really yours. So that was really interesting to hear about. And at the end, we made up a kind of a noirish little tale based on a sentence from Ludlum's The Borne Ultimatum. So great time. It was a fantastic conversation. Enjoy. This is me talking to Anthony Franze / Alex Finlay. So you didn't grow up in the DC area.
No. I grew up. I was a military kid. Father was in the Navy, but he flew planes. So we lived in bases all over the world. And I went to high school in Japan, and we lived in the UK, and we lived in Hawaii. And then we lived in, when he was quit flying, we lived in, he went to the War College in Leavenworth, Kansas. So I lived in Leavenworth for a year where I could see the prison from my window.
Right.
And then he landed in Strategic Air Command at a base just outside Omaha, Nebraska, which is where I spent my last 2 years of high school.
Do you have siblings?
I have two. They both kind of during the journeys. Like my oldest sister, we were in Hawaii when she graduated from high school, so she just stayed there, and she's been there ever since. And my other older sister, she's been on the West Coast, but now she moved to Nebraska. So that's where they are right now.
I find it interesting when kids are shuttled all around the world. I've talked to several people who have had that same experience, either through the parents' military or corporate travel. When you look back on it now, what are your memories of being in places so foreign like Japan and Leavenworth? are you kind of thankful for that experience, or would you have preferred to kind of stay in one place?
No, I think it was, it has pros and cons like anything else. I wouldn't change it. think back then it was a lot harder. Like when you moved, you didn't have FaceTime or the internet or anything. So you basically, when you moved, you thought, well, I'm never going to see these people again. So you have to kind of start over, and there's no support.
And that's probably true, right?
Yeah,
I didn't see a lot of them again.
You didn't know. I've seen more of them now on Facebook, 30 years later. Yeah, I mean, it was like going to high school in Japan was kind of a magical period for me, where we weren't in Tokyo, we were off in northern Japan in a city called Misawa, and American kids just kind of running amok and experiencing another culture. And I thought it was great to experience, to understand that the world's a big place, and meet different people, and so it was definitely something I wouldn't trade. There were downsides. Moving a lot's hard. Being a new kid forever, and you move to a small town in the summer, and it wasn't as easy to make friends, right? Because everybody's away at camp or at school's not in. So definitely had some downsides, but overall it was a great experience.
Are you from a military family, like going back multi generations?
No, just my father. My father joined when he was 17, and
yeah.
It was kind of a, something. He had a difficult upbringing. It was kind of something that kind of saved his life, and so that's really the only military connection in our family.
Did you have that bug to enlist, or?
I was probably not too much of a not rule follower to ever feel like the military would be suited to my particular personality. So I never got the urge, but yeah, I mean, it's definitely a noble thing to do. It just didn't it didn't seem like it'd be a good fit for me.
Were you leaning towards any particular interests when you were in high school? Or was there something because I know a lot of people who have traveled a lot as kids, took a lot of solace in reading, like the books were their companions. I don't know if that was held true for you.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think two things for me. Music. I played in bands. I played in from when I was 14 years old. I was in kind of what now would be called kind of embarrassing 80s metal band kind of experiences, but I was really into it, and we were pretty serious about it. Unlike my current hairstyle, I looked a little different back then with my 80s kind of long hair. But so there was music, books definitely, and movies. Movies they weren't as easily available as they are now, obviously. But yeah, movies. When you moved, I lived in. We moved to Hawaii, and we had to live in a hotel in Waikiki for like months and months, just my father and I. And that sounds like it would be great, but
sounds terrible, actually.
In reality, it was not. It was basically I'd meet kids, and they'd be there for like 3 days, and then they'd leave, and you kind of at that age didn't appreciate the touristy kind of things. But movies, like the hotel movie thing, was my, when I moved there, I didn't have any friends. They just, watching movies and reading were really kind of things that got me through, because it definitely, I lived with just my father since I was 10. And so it would be just, and he worked and would be gone for these stretches of time. So
wow.
Those are the kind of things that you do.
So it was just you and your dad?
Yeah, since I was 10. My parents got divorced when I was 10. We lived in the UK, and weirdly, I still don't know why. Like, I went with my dad. My sister stayed with my mom for a period, and kind of went back and forth. But it was just my father and I for all those years. So.
Wow. Who were your go-to bands in the 80s? Like, were you into the metal, the glam metal?
I kind of, yeah. I mean, it's embarrassing now.
No. I'm 80s music. I'm wearing my Smith shirt today. So.
Yeah. I was like, Bon Jovi, Cinderella, the hair metal bands of the time, Poison. And then I kind of morphed more into when that scene was fading in Nirvana and Pearl Jam and
Right.
and those groups kind of took over.
The heavy guitar bands, yeah.
Yeah. But all those Alice in Chains, all of those kind of bands, those are kind of still my go-to. I think I like Linkin Park and later variations of those those groups that like I think were dominated our early '90s. But no, I was all in on the in the '80s and the hair down to my waist. I had the whole thing. Yeah.
Oh, that's all this. So I think we're probably of similar age, and in the '80s, I was I was living in LA, and I was definitely the alternative '80s new wave kind of scene. Depeche Mode and the Smiths and the Cure and Pixies. That was like James. Those were kind of the bands there. And I went to college in the East Coast, and everyone was listening to like Zeppelin. I'm like, what the fuck is this? I didn't know these major bands. I was so ignorant, and they had never heard of anything, that was coming out of the California scene. So it was quite an education for me.
Yeah. Did you grow up in California?
Yeah, I grew up primarily in Los Angeles.
Okay.
Went to school in New York, so I haven't been back much. I still have a lot of friends there, but it's lost its appeal. It's just it's just so crowded. And then so you're getting ready to go to college, and you knew what you wanted to study, or I know you eventually went to law school, but was that in your
No, it's embarrassing to say in a public place, but I guess I'm of the age where I can admit my foibles. But
we're going to admit lots of things on this conversation on both sides, so we're good.
Right. So I was I went to 4 high schools or 5 high schools, I can't remember. And so I was not a great high school student. My GPA would not get me into any institution in this much more competitive world we live in for colleges. I thought I was going to be in a rock band, and that's what I was going to do. I met my wife when I was in high school in Nebraska, my last 2 years there. And she basically signed me up for the SAT, said, basically encouraged me to have a plan B, probably because she in her heart knew that we weren't very good. And so I went to college in Nebraska. I didn't, I basically, after my first, we were playing clubs, and after my first year, I kind of realized like this wasn't going to be my life, playing in clubs and making a living at music. And I found the law classes were interesting, and I really just kind of had to turn it around and kind of, for the first time ever, focus on doing well at academics. And then from there, once I decided I wanted to go to law school, I ended up at Notre Dame, and and it was just more or less finding that thing that got me, transitioning from into the reality that playing music just wasn't going to be something.
So a couple years into undergrad, the band just dissolved, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I remember the day. I mean, we were playing these metal clubs, and we went to this. We were in the backstage at one of these clubs at 11 at night, and a storm had blown through town and had knocked a tree had fallen on the club itself and had caved in the roof of the dressing room.
Sign.
Right. And so in the dressing room, there's this big tub where, the touring bands that have come through, there was like beer cans, cigarette, it was like disgusting. There's no lights in the dressing room other than one of those like lights you hang on when you do work on cars.
Right.
And I just remember sitting around going, we'll finish tonight, but this is it for me. I'm done. And my bandmates, who are still my close friends, were, in college as well. And I think we all kind of knew. Monday, went and got my hair cut. All,
Oh wow, you were really committed.
I was all in.
I'm in.
I was all in, and then that was it. And so
that was your version of enlisting,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I didn't go with this look, but this was forced on me later through genetics. But
what role was it? Were you a singer, a guitar player?
I played bass and in different bands over the years. In my last bands I was in, I sang and I played bass. But I have been guitarist in bands, in different bands over the years. Not anymore, but.
And were you guys mostly doing covers?
We did a combination of both. The clubs make you focus on covers, but we did our own stuff as well. Yeah. So not that I wanted ever to leak.
So I'm just curious if there was any, if you were a lyricist at all, if that maybe was one of the origins of. I mean, clearly being in a band is an origin of needing an outlet for some creative impulses, right?
Yeah, I think that's what
it morphs into.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't the lyricist, I wasn't, but I do think that losing that part of myself and that creative side, I didn't know it at the time, but I was looking for a replacement for it. It wasn't until I was in my late 20s that I thought, I don't even know why. I thought I want to try and write a novel, and I did. I wrote my first book, and. I thought it was great. I got an agent. Everything was going very exciting for me at the time that I could do this. I was a practicing lawyer, a new lawyer. And so it was just a kind of way to escape and have some kind of creative outlet. And inevitably the book didn't sell, and it was super discouraging. And at that point in my career, early in a legal career at a big law firm, it's pretty demanding. And so I just kind of was discouraged enough to put it aside for writing aside for 5 or 6 years. I wish I could go back and not have done that, because I think, I lost years of getting better and all these things you do.
Right.
But it wasn't for 5, 6 years before I tried again. And that book did sell and got me kind of going. I actually remember meeting you. You may not remember this, but my first ever Thriller Fest.
Right.
I was going in first time as a writer with my writer hat on, first book, and I saw you kind of coming into one of the rooms. You got a backpack and looked kind of new like me, and one of the people I met too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we were debut authors together.
Oh, maybe that's right. Debut authors program.
But just going back a little bit, that's people listening to this. It sounds so casual, I thought I wanted to write a book, so I wrote a book. The reality of it is that's a big fucking deal, right? Would you remember what the impetus, was there I've had this idea inside me for a while, or just I want the challenge of something like that? And what was the process like writing that first book? Was it painful? Did you know what you were doing? Because you weren't an English major. You're like me. You were in kind of the business corporate world.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you're writing a book, and I had no idea what I was doing.
I had no idea what I was doing, which was probably a good thing, because I think it would have been too overwhelming to know. And I was kind of a delusion, and I sometimes see this with other lawyers. A lot of what I do for a living is writing legal briefs, and I'm an appellate lawyer, so that's even more than most lawyers. And so I thought, well, I can write briefs, and I know how to write, and I know the rules. I could string a sentence together. So I didn't really study the craft, and I didn't. There weren't as many conferences when I but when I really first started, there wasn't Thriller Fest, there wasn't the International Thriller Writers Organization, there wasn't these resources, which I always encourage people kind of starting this journey to take advantage of. And so it was just, I don't know why I decided, hey, I don't think I had some great idea. I knew I loved reading. I liked reading when I was in law school. I loved reading John Grisham books, Scott Turow books. And so I thought I'll just give it a try. Looking back at the first book, I understand why it didn't sell. I'm surprised I got an agent from it. It's not the agent I have now, but
You and me both. My
yeah.
first 3 books didn't sell.
Yeah, no, it's definitely. I mean, we know, like, when people, you hear that, like, we both know Jenny Milchman. She's pretty open about, like, her first 7 books didn't sell. Like, how and ever? Like, I had one book didn't sell, and it took me back 5 years. But it's definitely, what I've learned is there's a craft to this, and you can write, and you can know how to write in a different form, but you will be much better if you kind of study, for the learn the conventions of, particularly in the thriller genre. I think there's a lot to learn, and even if you're a great writer, a great journalist, a great legal writer, I do think there are things that can make, for any aspiring writers listening to this, can make the process go faster, probably, than it was for me. Maybe with trial and error.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, like, so you and I are both similar in terms of, like, what we were doing in our day jobs was doing a lot of, for lack of a better term, technical writing. But there is a muscle there, right, that you do build, because a lot of people can't write sentences, like, whether it's creative writing or they're just, it's a hard craft to master, because you learn in that kind of writing, brevity and being succinct. But I think, to your point, there is a lot to learn in the craft, but it's a balancing act, right? Because there's so many classes you could take, so many books you could read, that a lot of it has probably conflicting information in it. And you need to have time to discover your own voice and your own style. And for me, I read several books about the craft. I didn't take any classes, but I realized, like, I would just gravitate to things that I enjoyed reading. Like, how did this person make me feel this way? When I would look at the sentences, and you start to, I don't know if mimic is the right, but you start to see, like, oh, there wasn't a lot of extra detail in this, and that made my heart race. It was just so to the point. I don't know. So I feel like after a while, I started pushing back against, like, wanting to hear about how people do their craft, because I'm like, I do what I do and I enjoy it, and that's part of the joy to me of writing, is just being in my own voice and my own style, kind of, for better or for worse. I don't know if you feel like that at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. I mean, for me, it's been like, you can get lost in the sauce of any research, including researching how to write, or researching, the rules of writing or whatever. And there are conflicting things. I think, what happened with me is I wrote that first book, didn't sell, with no understanding of other than reading and knowing what I like to read. The next book, I like to think it a little better. It got to the point, I worked with a freelance editor, which is probably where I learned how much I didn't know. When I saw a professional who'd been, worked at a big house and edited my work, just seeing the edits helped me think, okay, point of view. Like, I'm mixing up the point of view. I'm not thinking, being consistent in certain ways. And so that was a tremendous help. And then I did this when I was trying to promote my first book. It was at a smaller press. It wasn't at St. Martin's, where I am now. My first book. I was trying to, you got to get out there and try and, stand out in the crowd, or find some way to market yourself. And I started writing this series for Suspense Magazine, where I'd interview, kind of a bit like what you're doing, but it would be targeted on, like, best-selling authors, and what are their top 5 things, like, what are their top 10 advice. And so I'd have these calls with, the biggest names in the genre. I think we ended up doing like 70 of these things.
Oh, wow.
And I started, like, hearing from different authors, very successful authors, some of the same things, the things that they're kind of, they're very, if they had, some of them are like, you got to be careful with rules. You don't want, rules can constrain you, but, I'm very particular about point of view. I never head hop, or I
no, it's confusing.
Yeah, exactly. And so I would see these things. I started, I internalized them, and I credit that series for me for the my next book, the one that where I um, went to a larger publisher, just getting me hearing all this advice and thinking about it as I was writing that book. And to your point, like one of the things a lot of authors said is a good exercise. What they did is they thought about a book they loved, and that they diagnosed it. Like they took it apart and deconstructed it and asked themselves, you don't want to copy, but it's still kind of like, why did I love what this author did, in this chapter, or why did I want to keep turning the page? And a lot of them diagnosed that. And I think that's probably a good thing, just to take a book for people who are trying to get started in this, and take a book you just love and kind of analyze it like clinically.
Yeah. And then it also depends on if you're writing a series or if you're writing, I write standalone. So the voice could be very different each time. Stylistically, it could be different, even though it all falls within the same kind of purview of, domestic psychological thrillers.
Yeah.
But if you're writing, a series, there's a little bit more, I guess, responsibility to kind of have a very similar tone each time. So take me through your publication journey then a little bit, because I want to get to where you are now. We on this show we talk a lot about the industry and the good and the bad of the industry, and the highs and the lows, and anything we know. There's ups and downs with this for sure. So you started having success with St. Martin's, and you were writing under Anthony Franze. And then where did that lead?
Well, I mean, that was exciting for me. It was, I did 2 books. All of my Anthony Franze books were kind of legal thrillers set in the Supreme Court, which is, I'm a appellate lawyer, and a lot, my practice involves the U.S. Supreme Court quite a bit. I've had many cases there. That's
tremendous experience to be able to write from that perspective.
Yeah, I mean, and it was like one of these kind of write what you know things. I thought that very few people know about, really. I mean, they see things about the Supreme Court, or Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who's kind of became an icon. And so there's some pop culture kind of understanding of the court. But the day-to-day, the history, the rituals, and all of that, I thought, for me at the time, it was kind of like setting a book in a small town, because that's what the Supreme Court community in Washington, D.C. is. The Supreme Court's like got its own building, looks like a Roman temple, and it's got these like 400 people who work there. It's got a cafeteria, and it's got it's an office building, but it's also kind of this thing. And the community I'm in, the lawyers, it's like any specialized practice. There's jargon, there's customs, there's all the inside stuff. And so for me, I thought that was interesting, and so I did that for 3 books.
Was there any conflict with your law firm with you putting out those books?
No, my law firm was terrific about it. I've had the Supreme Court community was really, the first book I was a little concerned. It's writing a thriller. My first novel, I killed almost the entire Supreme Court on the first page. So are they going to let me in this building again? But I had, solicitor generals introduced me at events. I had, they kind of got a kick out of it. And so, after my third book, they were going to make a TV show out of at NBC of the law clerks. So the law clerks, the real law clerks, had a lot of fun with, like I heard through the grapevine, they had a lot of, fun with kind of tongue-in-cheek things. They made their own IMDb page. They did funny things related to books, like things like that, just as a aside from a very serious job. And then I just got to the point where I was like, I don't know what else there is for me to to say or do in the court. And I was at Thriller Fest, and I'll put my plug in for ITW for anybody who's not familiar with it. It's an annual conference. Hopefully in 2022, it will be in person. It's planned to be, but it's a combination of, for those who haven't attended, of the classes and opportunities to meet agents and industry professionals for newer writers at the beginning, and then the back half's kind of like a traditional conference for writers, like a trade kind of conference. And I was finished my last Supreme Court thriller, and was at the bar at ITW, and there was a younger editor who was talking to me, and basically we were talking about what I was going to do next, and he wasn't my editor at the time at St. Martin's, but he was he worked at the company, and he's like, he was encouraging me to what are you working on? And I said, I'm thinking of moving away from the Supreme Court. And we talked about this idea he had. And he said, I really like your work. I'd like, I think, let's keep talking and keep this dialogue going. Maybe we can do a project where we could break you out from the legal thriller into just a more mainstream thriller audience. And it was about a year of keeping in touch, worked on some pages, and he ended up buying the book for, based on, I think, 100 pages. And he really did the book's every last sphere. And he really helped, for me, this was a breakout opportunity, and it was, it's been really gratifying. Now, the wrinkle is to distinguish my legal thrillers, we did it under a pen name, Alex Finlay, which was weird and kind of for me, and it's pretty common in the literary world. But for those who've been in the business world, it's kind of like, what, I'm doing something under a different name, kind of weird. But it's been really gratifying. It's been a phenomenal experience, and the book did well. And so that's kind of been my journey of the earlier legal thrillers, and then kind of now my next I have a Finlay book coming out in March, and then I just am finalizing a deal for the next 2 Finlay books for the following 2 years. So
that's great. So you transitioned editors, but within the same house.
Yeah. I had my original editor for my legal thrillers had left the company, so it wasn't it was an easy transition. It wasn't complicated, but it was definitely this editor has a lot of vision and was really hungry, and all these things that I had kind of really appreciated, and really just took the time to help me kind of take the next steps in my career, and had a plan and a real vision, which was terrific.
Do you find that because I find it super interesting about pen names, because I've always thought about that too. It's like, well, what if you want to do something totally different? But it's like, well, you can't just do one thing, because they're going to want to know what other things do you have aside from that. But just the idea of it's kind of just fun to think about a little bit, but it is also weird, because you do an interview with like, what do I call you?
Right. Yeah. Especially if you knew me, like,
right. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, I mean, I think a lot of people, you look at like Sean Cosby, who writes this S.A. Cosby, so it's very similar. But I think if I were ever to do it, I would be like, it'd be totally different. Like, it had nothing to do with my name. It would be totally, completely different. Do you find writing under Alex Finlay that your voice is markedly different, or do you see a lot of overlap in style and the tone?
I feel like when I've got my Alex Finlay hat on, it is a little different, weirdly enough. It just seems like a weird thing to say.
That makes sense to me.
Yeah. And so I'll give you an example. Every last year came out, I had a next book due. I had a legal thriller type book, an Anthony Franze book done, that I thought, well, this would be a good follow-up to my Finlay novel. And I worked on the book for, a good, 6 months into when, my deadline was coming up, not too far off. And I just, at some point, I remember calling my agent and saying, this is just, Every Last Beer was doing really well. It sold all these countries. I had a movie deal and everything was going great. And I thought, this is just not a worthy follow-up. And I was worried because I had, deadlines approaching, and my agent was, basically supportive and said, well, let's talk to, my editor. And he's kind of guided this whole Alex Finlay thing. And to his credit, he said, well, do you have any other ideas? And I said, well, I have one. And I sent him, I wrote basically that day what became the opening prologue to the upcoming book, The Night Shift. And he said, this is the book I want to read. This is an Alex Finlay book. Let's just start again, and I'll work on my end to, move the production, which was, pretty incredible, and a big leap of faith on his part. And but yeah, I agree though. Like I'm doing the final page passes of the Night Shift right now, and it does read different than the Franze books. I mean, there's still similar style. Kind of I'm a minimalist with and I'm a real say as much as you can in as few words as you can.
Totally, me too.
But there is a different kind of tone, and so I'm just trying to channel that for the other books and see how it goes.
Yeah, it's probably not too dissimilar than when you make the jump from writing a POV of a person totally unlike yourself. I did that jump with my fourth book. I started writing from a female POV primarily for several books. And I totally just saw how it was so much more interesting to me because I wasn't at all me. And that kind of just was very freeing. Like I could just, people wouldn't read it and say, "Oh, I totally saw this person in you." So I can see that it's kind of almost, you have this cloak that you can hide under and just be somebody totally different, and that's got to be very freeing in a way.
Yeah, I mean, it is freeing. It's weird, like you said. Everybody at the publisher calls me Alex, and I respond. I haven't, when I sign emails, I'm always like, I just, I sign it AF because then it doesn't seem as weird to me because my real initials are AF. But
okay, yeah.
but it's weird. But it was definitely something I really thought about, and I just decided it's a business decision.
Totally.
It was the right thing to do, and I wanted to keep doing this, and it was the pathway to having moving to the next level. And so it's definitely weird, but it is funny because a lot of my friends, there hasn't been the Thriller Fest or any of these conferences where you see people. So
right.
a lot of my friends don't know that, they may have seen the book, but they have I've had a couple instances where I have an old writer friend contact me and they'll be like, well, what are you working on? And I'm like, I'll send them the Alex Finlay, kind of website. And they're like, oh my God, I've heard it. Yeah, I've heard of this book. So it's pretty funny. And it's been strange at the same time.
Yeah, and it's more work because it's enough of a pain in the ass to, do, justice to your social media channels than having to do it potentially.
I'm terrible at it all with social media, so it's like it was basically not. It's not very much of a step up for me on that purposes because I'm basically an old cranky man when it comes to social media, and I begrudgingly may do it, although my publisher does a lot of it for me.
Yeah, I'm about to take another. I try to take at least a month off a year of just silence, and I'm thinking about.
I'm on about a year of not posting anything on Facebook.
So you're really
but I still, I check now and then, and I the parts I like about it are still there. It's just the parts I don't like about it are still there too.
Exactly.
So,
well, listen, we're going to do a quick storytelling, then we're going to wrap up.
All right, I'm going to be terrible at this. I know.
It's always fun. You'd be surprised. It's always fun. It's always scary. And I get nervous every time, and I've done this a lot. And because I'm like, oh, I'm going to be stupid. But that's the beauty of it. If we can, we can edit out long pauses and stuff like that. I got 3 books for you to choose from, and we're going to choose a sentence out of one of them, and then I'll read that sentence, and you give me a couple sentences, whatever you want to do, and I'll give a few, and then after a couple of minutes, we'll call it a day. I got Ludlum's Borne Ultimatum.
Okay.
These are all old school books. Stephen King's Salem's Lot, classic, which I didn't actually read until like a few months ago. And Red Dragon from Thomas Harris.
Let's go. I'm actually reading Stephen King's Billy Summers right now.
So am I. I'm about 3/4 of the way. I love it.
I love it too.
I think it's one of his better ones because it's grounded in it's a real book. It's not a fantastic book, right? It's the reality of this dude.
This guy, yeah. No, I'm only, I wouldn't say I'm even a third in yet, but it's definitely pulled me in. It's unlike other, it reminds me a little of in some weird way, like Lou Berney's November Road. I don't know if you read that.
It's a little noirish. Yeah.
But it's great. But anyway, I digress. So let's go with the Ludlum, just old school.
Yeah, I remember like reading these in my 20s and be like, this is fantastic. I didn't realize how long this was. Give me a number between 1 and 650.
Let's go with 52.
Can you believe it was 600? It's crazy.
Now that's back before they could edit it so much. They just had typewriters.
Right. And then give me a sentence between 1 and 5.
Let's just go with 1 just to keep it.
All right. It's a quote. Holy Christ.
It's the last thing he thought before he was put into the trunk of the car.
He looked around, but there was nothing to look at because it was pitch black inside. He could already feel his lungs starting to seize, though he knew that was impossible. There was plenty of air in here, at least for a little while. The question was, how old was this car? Did it have a safety latch inside or not?
And the bigger question was how far it was from the lake just down the hill.
His hands burned from the bite of the duct tape, and he could feel the blood pumping through the veins in his neck. Take a deep breath, he said. Just take 3 seconds to take a deep breath.
That thought was interrupted when something terrifying happened. The car started to roll slowly down the hill.
Normally, he'd be worried that they were taking him somewhere to kill him, but he knew that he was the only person in the car. It bumbled and rumbled down the road, and he wondered what the impact was going to feel like when it hit the water.
Then something unexpected happened. The car stopped. There was the sound of gunshots outside.
There was one distinct scream. It was male. And then silence. A silence like he had never heard before. And then footsteps. Footsteps on gravel. He heard the door open, a shift of weight inside, and then close, and the car started again.
This time it was slammed in reverse. He wondered if the driver knew he was cargo in the back.
He did what he had been always trained to do, to listen, to observe, to take mental notes. He did so as the tires went from a gravel road to asphalt. As the speed went from moderate to fast, he knew they were on the highway.
He didn't know how long they were in the car. He tried his best to count the seconds, count the minutes. At some point, the highway sound turned to gravel again, and the car came to a stop.
He listened as the driver exited, and then another silence ensued, and then footsteps near the trunk. More than one pair, maybe more than 2 pairs. And then the voices he knew too well. What are we going to do with them? Said one.
This is when he knew he had to be ready to strike. Once they approached the trunk lid, he would have to use everything inside of him to come out swinging, scratching, stabbing with his thumbs and his fingers.
I think we'll call it there. That was good. I would read that.
That was actually kind of fun.
So to me, like, I get nervous and then I get into it and I start visualizing everything, and it it kind of gets the juices flowing a little bit. You're like, I feel like sitting down and writing because I can kind of see this. It's what's hard is when somebody when the other person says, and then something unexpected happens, and then they just end it. You're like, oh God damn it! Why did you don't serve that to me? Follow it up a little bit. Hey man, it was great talking to you. I appreciate.
No, it's great catching up. Great talking to you too, and I hope to see you in person on the circuit soon enough.
Yeah, absolutely, and congrats on all the success, not only with your Anthony Franze novels, but with your Alex Finlay novels. And I think that's a really interesting story, not just for me, but for anyone listening, because it's part of the industry, and you can have multiple lives in this industry, and I think that's really a cool thing. So congrats on everything.
No, thank you. Thanks, and congrats to all your success. My last time I was in Colorado, my wife picked up your not your last book, the Dead Girl in 2A, and it consumed her the whole trip.
Oh.
So it's great.
That's very nice. All right, buddy, enjoy your weekend.
All right, you too. Thanks, pal.
So that was my conversation with Anthony Franze / Alex Finlay. But I will refer to him as Alex because that's what he's writing under right now. So if you want to find out more about him, you can just go to alexfinlaybooks.com. And if you want to find out more about me or subscribe to my newsletter, just go to carterwilson.com. That's it for now. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. More episodes out soon. Take care.